Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Curious Kingdom. Today we are recapping action-adventure movie The Portable Door. The movie begins with a young man named Paul having an important interview today. He rushed anxiously to his destination, encountering numerous troubles along the way, including a strange old man trying to strike up a conversation, but he ignored him and joined the crew for the interview, only for his scarf to be snatched away by a dog. Paul chased the messy dog into a small alley and through a door. Interestingly, the place he reached was also hiring. On a sofa sat a charming lady, seemingly waiting for her interview. Paul decided to sit next to her and watch the company introduction playing on the TV. After watching for a while, Paul could only gather that the company was called Wells, but he had no idea what kind of business they were in. Suddenly, laughter echoed through the room, followed by the appearance of a man and woman. A hairy man in a suit named Beardy moved toward the workplace and requested that Paul follow him, shockingly knowing his name. Paul swiftly followed him to the subsequent floor, where the chief, Wells, and board individuals were situated. He started a meeting in this area and finished it similarly as dumbfounded. Down and out, Paul left, feeling like he had blown his opportunity. Luckily, he found the muddled Kenny was close by as yet holding his scarf, however his misfortune was nowhere near finished. After getting back, Paul discovered that his dearest companion and flatmate intended to move out, meaning he would need to bear the whole lease. As the two contended unendingly, an odd hook pushed open the mail space and threw a letter into the room. The letter, shockingly, was from Wells' organization, expressing that Paul was selected for the job. Overpowered with happiness, he neglected to see that he had never given his location, however the organization some way or another knew where he resided. The following day, when the morning timer rang, Paul awakened from his slumber and immediately prepared for work. Afterward, he entered the organization with an invigorated heart. A hot secretary sat in the doorway. After Paul was introduced to her, she promptly advised Beardy from yesterday to guide Paul. He drove Paul to the subsequent floor, making sense of that Wells was a law office as they skull-blind. From that point forward, they entered a bustling workspace and Paul noticed individuals in various workplaces, unfit to recognize what they were really doing. Beardy likewise made an odd solicitation. No piss were permitted in the organization. He then, at that point, drove Paul into the deepest office, where he saw Sophie, the enchanting woman from yesterday. Both of them were the understudies employed as of late in the whole organization. Beardy said that somebody would come to orchestrate their work and afterward left the workplace. Due to his apprehension, Paul continued to talk constantly. Similarly, as Sophie was going to hinder him, he out of nowhere hopped onto a seat and pointed ahead. An unidentified animal shot into the shadows, and when Paul attempted to draw a nearer look, a normal mouse rose up out of behind a burial. Before long, the secretary opened the doorway and gave a few guides to Paul, requesting that he circle the areas containing boss site stores. Sophie was to help him too. The two went through the whole daytime looking at maps until noon. As they went first floor, considering what to eat, they were caught by their boss from the directorate. She drove the two to a recreation area, and out of nowhere, a canister was tossed out of the sewer. The lady smoothly caught the canister, and afterward guided the two to look forward. She said that the woman on the seat was reading a novel and we aimed to create a coincidence similar to the event happening in the novel. Sophie couldn't resist the opportunity to ask how she can know where she's at in the book. A better than at that point told her than stand in the shrubs, and afterward plumped down on a seat and versed the lady. Sophie got in line stunned, yet marvelously found that she could see according to the lady's viewpoint. At the point when the lady read about Cecilia bouncing into the wellspring, Sophie promptly lifted her hand to flag. Their boss saw it and out of nowhere moved her finger, causing the man sitting by the wellspring to fall into the water unexpectedly. The woman on the seat rushed over to check. What's more, a heartfelt connection started. The boss lady lauded Sophie for working effectively, making sense of that the man's folks had burned through a huge load of cash to sort out for their child to wed the woman on the seat. With this occurrence, the two would without a doubt accept it was fate. Paul couldn't resist the urge to panic, asking what the heck is going on. The boss lady told that Sophie was a seer. At last started to make sense of the organization's business for Paul. It worked out that the vast majority of Wells' employees were equipped for wizardry, creating coincidences. They were viable wizards who utilized their wizardry to serve the clients for cash. Despite the fact that Sophie was an understudy, she was on something else entirely from Paul. The prevalent just took Sophie with her, passing on Paul to get back to the office. Paul took out a sandwich to eat, getting over the breadcrumbs from the guide. Startlingly, he out of nowhere felt an unusual sensation in his palm. As he held his hand over the guide, he appeared to enter the workplace. He requested that Paul gaze directly ahead and keep feeling the guide with his palm. An electric surge hit Paul's fingers, highlighting the area containing square-shaped stores. It appeared to be that Paul additionally had a few powerful capacities that could cause him to recognize where the designated objects were found. Wells hauled him out of the storage room and took him to his office. He said the organization was at a basic stage, battling for its endurance, and required a seer to assist everybody with refocusing. Obviously, Paul was just soothsayer. To draw near to him, Wells brought up Paul's reckless dad. He identified with Paul, grumbling about his own dad, who made him sign an agreement selling his spirit and congo blinding him. The two of them had experienced their dad's abuse. Wells comprehended that Paul needed to show off his abilities and quickly jump all over this chance. Wells requested that Paul assist him with tracking down a doorway. Paul had no clue about what the doorway resembled. While looking for the doorway, he was interfered with by a wavy-haired witch from the governing body. She excitedly welcomed him, however Paul saw that her hair braids were moving like serpents. Paul got back to his home and while sleeping confronted by his manager. His capacity was to control dreams, which implied that Paul was still in a dream. He needed to know the motivation behind why Wells had recruited Paul. Nevertheless, Wells had cautioned Paul to stay quiet about the doorway. Seeing that he wouldn't admit, he utilized wizardry to twist Paul's leg, making each of his teeth drop out and his ears to become colossal. Albeit this was occurring in a fantasy, Paul was as yet panicked and had no real option except to admit to him. In the wake of getting the data he needed, he arranged to leave, saying that the compact doorway could open the Bank of the Dead. The following day, Paul continued looking through in the organization and saw the words Bank of the Dead on the floor. Pursuing the bolt's bearing, he continued to a faintly lit storm cellar. Paul painstakingly opened the doorway, yet inside was only a standard storeroom. Before he could review it completely, he was pursued out by Beardy. Paul didn't surrender effectively and got back to the storeroom the next day. He immediately found that the wall inside was a deception. He went through the wall and entered one more space loaded up with peculiar and strange things. Among them, the most peculiar one was a stapler, which shockingly hit a goblin animal. Paul had never envisioned that such animals really existed. The animal pointed him toward a path and Paul accumulated his boldness to push ahead. Paul tracked down the needed doorway. Inquisitive, Paul entered through the doorway. The second he shut it, the convenient doorway transformed into a towel and voices could be heard from inside the workplace. It appeared Wells was discussing Paul's dad and the vanishing of the organization's previous chief. Paul kept listening and ended up finding the organization's closely guarded secrets. Truth be told, Wells was dealing human spirits and involved the organization's workers as the guinea pigs. When they marked a soul agreement, they would totally lose their identity and Wells' next target was Sophie. A predominant and others knew nothing about this arrangement. Paul understood that he was unable to hand the convenient doorway over them to stop Wells' malevolent arrangement. He got the towel and perused the directions on it. Clearly, by discussing a spell in the objective, one could magically transport there. Paul was shipped to a store cooler. He got a towel and gotten back to the organization. Racing to the storage room office. He removed Sophie's eye and discarded it, as it had some sort of spying gadget on it. He told Sophie what he saw and took out the towel to show the utilization of the doorway. Paul mumbled a spell to open the doorway, yet ended up in an unusual space with incalculable doorways, while hearing strange voice. He immediately hauled Sophie out, acknowledging he had committed an error that he needed to express the objective prior to opening the doorway. Once more he attempted, this time mumbling the name of the condo. What's more, they effectively showed up at the right area. Sophie was excited and really wanted to drag Paul around, transporting constant. The two went to Egypt and Gold Country, rode together in Jamaica, and surprisingly, saw the aura together. They exploited work breaks to travel almost the whole world, and love bloomed between them. Be that as it may, Sophie realized she had marked a soul agreement and didn't know whether her affections for Paul were certifiable. Thusly, they wanted to find and obliterate the agreement. The two got back to the organization through the doorway. What's more, Paul had recently stowed away the towel when Beardy scublined in. He saw their abnormal cloughing in the sand on the ground, understanding what had occurred. Beardy asked Paul to return what he had taken and leave the organization, or probably he would confront Wells' anger. In any case, Paul needed to find Sophie's soul. The doorway didn't adhere to Paul's directions to enter Wells' office. All things considered, it took them to a printer region. The printers were working all alone, printing contracts for souls. They realized that Wells had added soul arrangements to these ordinary agreements, making individuals accidentally sign the agreement selling their spirits. Paul again opened the doorway planning to go to Wells' office, however the doorway defied his order and sent them to a dim storm cellar with Bank of the Dead set apart on the floor. Sophie reviewed the particulars of the agreements, realizing that all spirits were forever put away in the bank. They searched for an exit plan, just to coincidentally find a gathering of goblins. They escaped an alarm, and ended up behind a doorway where Beardy seemed to flex his mottled facial hair. Beardy angrily reprimanded them for not regarding his warnings. As he spoke, Wells emerged from the shadows and told Beardy to get lost with his facial hair and flunkies, however Beardy rejected, asserting that without goblins, help the wizards were futile. As they contended, Paul and Sophie made a move to open the doorway and break for their crappy lives. Nonetheless, they neglected a standard, that individual shutting the doorway commands it. Thus, Wells reclaimed his command over the gateway doorway and caught the two in Nether, where Wells' dad was likewise detained. It's then at that point, uncovered that quite a while back, Wells tricked his dad, Wells sir, to this spot utilizing a child dragon, making a move to replace his dad and assume control over the organization. Paul reviewed Wells' past words that he had marked a soul agreement with his dad, which would permit Wells, sir, to control this child. So Paul asked why they don't return by condoblining Wells through his soul agreement. Be that as it may, Wells, sir, explained that it wasn't so straightforward. He needed to store the soul agreement in the bank of the dead for it to be effective. Not entirely set in stone to track down the exit, however there were doorways all over. Wells, sir, said he had gone door after door for quite some time, and practically all doorways lead back to Nether only. After repeated attempts using his skills, Paul at last tracked down the exit. Wells, sir, was thrilled to recapture his opportunity and requested that Paul count on the agreement, while they went to go up against his detestable child. The father-son duo, both being the top wizards, started their savage fight. In the interim, Paul was nailed near a gathering of goblins and couldn't get away. Seeing this, Sophie utilized clairvoyance to contact the Paul and ask for help. At that point, the secretary showed up with a stapler, yelling Wells, sir's name and tossed a gadget to him. Wells, sir, utilized wizardry to stir things up around town, uncovering the caught goblin inside. The secretary likewise uncovered her actual structure, a goblin, and embraced the other goblin. It turned out they were a goblin couple, furthermore, Bertie was their child. While the goblin family embraced, Wells made a move to send off an unexpected assault on his dad and caught him. Before long, the organization elderly folks showed up at the scene, attempting to prevent Wells from making more mayhem. Be that as it may, he disregarded them, yet in addition attacking Sophie, forcing Paul to give up the soul agreement. Sophie covertly spoke with Paul, speculating that he could undoubtedly track down the entry doorways, and use them to enter Bank of the Dead. Paul brought one of the doors under his feet and bounced into the bank. There Paul gave Wells' soul agreement to a bank worker and said he needed to make an exchange. Wells' powers disappeared, which permitted Wells, sir, to trap his malevolent child with wizardry, and Sophie took the towel to open the portable doorway. Together, they secured Wells in the Nether as his discipline. From that point forward, Wells, sir, removed the towel's use guidelines, rendering the doorway useless. Then Paul got back to the real world, holding Sophie's soul agreement that he recovered from the Bank of the Dead. They joyfully embrace one another, and the film closes there, without showing what deal Paul made to recover Sophie's soul. That's all for today, folks. Curious Night signing off. Stay safe, stay curious.